Here we start in the chapter number 6, I guess, in our syllabus, or 5. I forgot exactly. The chapter supply, demand, and government policies. Okay, you remember in the first chapter we have talked about markets and we talked about government. And you remember that the principle we have, one of the principles we have studied, we have seen, is that markets are a good way to organize economic activity, or are usually a good way to organize economic activities. In this chapter, we will see what happens if the government intervenes in the market. We'll see what happens if the government intervenes in the market. And we'll see two policies that alter the private market outcome. How these two government policies will affect the market outcome. The first policy we are going to see is price control. Price control. Price controls means government here dictates the prices. And the second policy is taxes. So we'll see first two policies. The first policy one is price control, and policy two, taxes. This is two policies that makes government intervene in the markets. And we will see whether these policies or this government intervention is good for the market or it is not good. It is good for the economy or it is not good. So we'll answer these questions. What are price ceilings and price floors? What are some examples of each? Price ceilings and price floors are two ways of price control. When we talk about price control here, we talk about price ceiling, price floors. How do price ceilings and price floors affect market outcomes? Market outcomes mean the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. And the second part of this chapter, how do taxes affect market outcome? How do the effect depends on whether the tax is imposed on buyers or sellers, what the incidence of a tax, and what determines the incidence. So we start with this defining price controls. Price control here we mean by price ceiling and price floor. A price ceiling is a legal maximum on the price of a good or a service. Is a legal maximum that the government imposes, a legal maximum price that the government imposes on certain goods. It tells sellers, this is the maximum price you should apply. If you apply a price larger than this maximum, you are like doing a crime and you should be punished by the law. Okay, here example, rent control. For example, in the US, the government imposes rent control. There is a maximum rent for each apartment. In Tunisia as well. For Tunisia, many vegetables, according to the law, have a maximum price. And price floor is the opposite, is a legal minimum. Is a legal minimum on the price of a good or service. The government says you should not, as a seller, you should not apply a price lower than such level. The widely known example is the minimum wage. In many countries like Tunisia and everywhere, many countries, even in the US, there is a minimum wage, below which a firm or government body or whatever should not give a wage less than this level. So this is what we mean by price ceiling and price floor. Taxes, just a definition, government can make buyers or sellers pay a specific amount on each unit. We'll use the supply and the demand model to see the same model we are always using to see how each policy affects the market outcome, the price buyers pay, the price sellers receive, and equilibrium quantity. So we start with the first policy, which is price control. And through these through two examples, we'll see what the effect of this price control policy on market outcome, and whether this policy is good or bad. Is government intervention in the market good or bad? Okay, so this first example, the market of apartments. The market of apartments. Here we have the same model, demand and supply. The price is the rent of an apartment, rental price, we call it rental price. The rent we pay for an apartment, and the quantity of apartments. This is the demand curve, and this is the supply curve. And this is the market outcome, the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. The equilibrium quantity is 300, and the price of equilibrium is 800. This is the equilibrium if, and here the equilibrium price, that means the price at which quantity supplied equals quantity demanded, and this price of 800 is the outcome of the market. When the market is left alone to determine the price is usually will end up to be $800. This is the price without government intervention. It is the price privately determined by the market. Okay, it is a market outcome. How price ceilings affect market? Price ceiling, you remember, it is a maximum price, maximum legal price ceilings. How price ceilings affect market outcome. So let's see what happens to this market outcome and to the market when government intervenes by imposing a price ceiling. We'll see two cases. Suppose that the government intervenes in the market of outcome, and the government feels and thinks that the prices or the rents of apartments are very high and makes housing very expensive for people, and this politician wants to get re-elected in the next election. So in order to gain the vote of the people, he says, okay, he asks, the politician, the government enacts a law that makes it, that tells to apartment owners who rent their apartments, real estate firms, this is, you should not ask a rent higher than $1,000. And $1,000 is the price ceiling imposed by The government. The government says the maximum rent in this country or in this city or in this town should be $1,000. If someone applies rent larger than the $1,000, he becomes or she becomes she's violating the law and it should be punished. So what happens here? And here $1,000 is maximum, and the market rent is $800. So the market rent here is lower than the maximum price ceiling. What does that mean? It means that the price ceiling above the equilibrium price here is not binding. Is not binding. The market rent is 800. So the market rent is the market outcome. The market outcome 800 is respecting the law. The market outcome of price of 800 is below the 1,000 maximum. So there is respecting the law here. It respects the law, so it is not binding. The price ceiling is not binding here. It's not binding, so it has no effect on the market outcome. It cannot, because 1,000 is higher than 800, so it cannot change this price ceiling policy. Cannot change the price. So because it is not binding. Let's see the other case. Suppose now the price ceiling is 500. 500 is way below the market price equilibrium, that is 800. This makes a price a rent of 800 larger than the maximum imposed by the law. So those who are applying such a rent are considered violating the law. So here, the price equilibrium is above the ceiling, and therefore this price is illegal. So this price is illegal here. It is illegal according to the law. Okay, so here nobody will apply a price of 800. 800 because it is illegal. So this, what happens? The ceiling here is a binding constraint. It is a constraint that is binding. It is a binding. We say here that the ceiling is a binding, the equilibrium price. Is a binding constraint on the price. Okay, 800 is illegal. So what happens here? What happens that sellers who are willing to sell at 800 will not be able to sell at 800 because they would be considered as illegal. So they will not sell their apartments, or they will not rent their apartments. Only those who are able to rent at 500 will supply their apartments. Only those who are able to rent at 500 will supply at 500. Okay. So here you see here the quantity of equilibrium, where supply is equal to demand. But when the price becomes $500, not $800 as a market should have. Few sellers will supply such quantity of apartments. The other sellers will quit the market. The other sellers will quit the market because they cannot sell or rent apartments at the sellers who are able to sell or to rent apartments at rents above $500 will quit the market because they are illegal. Only the sellers who are able to rent at $500 or below will stay in the market. So it makes the quantity supplied US here. But at $500, what is the demand? The demand can be found using the demand curve, and here can be the demand quantity demanded. The quantity demanded now, the rent is less cheaper than before, so many buyers will be willing to rent the apartments. So many buyers who could not afford the apartment when the price was 800, now they are able to rent, they are willing to buy or to rent the apartments when the apartment rent becomes 800. So many new buyers will enter the market. These buyers were out of the market because when the price was 800, they could not afford such apartments with 800. They were so out of the market. So now when the price is becoming 500, new buyers come into the market. So what we see here, the quantity supplied is 250 and the quantity demanded is 400. 250 quantity supplied and quantity demanded 400. So what we see here, the demand is way bigger than the supply. What happens? The demand is larger than the supply. What happens? We say there is a shortage. Shortage, you remember the shortage is when the demand is, there is excessive demand. When there is excessive demand, we say there is shortage. So what happens here when the government intervenes by imposing a price ceiling, and when the price ceiling is a binding constraint, is binding the market outcome. The market out, the price is here is larger, the equilibrium price of the market is larger than the maximum legal price imposed by the government. So here the government policy is a binding policy. So when the government policies and the price ceiling is binding policy, what happens in the market? Supply is no longer equal to the quantity demanded. Quantity supplied is no longer equal to the quantity demanded as before. Now there is an excessive demand. And when there is an excessive demand, we talk about shortage. Shortage when fewer sellers are willing to sell in the market and more buyers are willing to buy in the market. When the price is $500, the maximum price is $500, fewer sellers are willing to sell in the market. Those who are willing to sell at $800 cannot do so because they are considered illegal. So they quit the market. So only few sellers stay in the market. these few sellers can sell only 250 apartments. On the other side, with a rent of $500, more buyers come to the market because more buyers with $500 can afford such apartments. We end up by a quantity demanded of 400. 400 demand and 250 supplied makes an excessive demand, which is can be called by situation of a shortage. Here, government intervention created shortage in the market. I hope it is clear. Again, please interrupt me anytime if you have any question. Yes?
Why would the government want a shortage for a product?
No, here we don't how to say, we are not questioning the government why the government is not. Maybe the government has its reasons, as I said. Maybe they want to win the election or etc. Here, the purpose of this chapter is to show that government, that markets. By the end of this chapter, we will learn that usually governments, when they are, markets, when they are left alone, usually they give a better outcome than a government intervention. But usually, everywhere, Tunisia, the United States, everywhere there is government intervention, and government intervention because of maybe political reasons, and political reasons are always not always following economic rationality. Okay, so the rationals for politicians are not always the same as the rationals for an economist. Okay, so here we don't. The government, to give you a just short answer, the government maybe wants to please the people, to want to win the next elections, regardless of whether this policy will end up to be good or bad. Okay. So the purpose of this chapter to show that some government policies are and some government intervention in the markets are sometimes maybe bad, sometimes bad for the markets and for the allocation of resources. So how price ceilings affect market outcome? Again, another example. In the long run, the supply and demand are more price elastic. You see, as we have seen in the previous chapter, in the long run, elasticity is larger of the demand and the supply, which makes the supply curve flatter and the demand curve flatter. So if this price ceiling continue in the long run, you see the shortage becomes larger than before. So the shortage is, in the long run, the shortage is large. Okay? If this policy continue in the long run, the shortage will continue to increase. Shortages and rationing. With shortages, sellers must ration the goods among buyers. With shortages, sellers must ration goods among buyers. What do you mean by rationing? Rationing means, this is an example, means allowing each person here. allowing each person to have only a fixed amount of a particular commodity. I think you remember, I think last year, and I'm not sure if it is still in Tunisia right now, when the pandemic started, many people ran to markets to buy bread, flours, and they wanted to buy more and more than they need of bread, flours. So this, and you know, bread, flours in Tunisia is, I think it is there is a price ceiling about it is among the goods that has on which the government imposes a price ceiling, a maximum price. This made a shortage of bread, flours, farina in many supermarkets. So this made sellers, after a few time, deciding to ration the bread, flours, allowing each buyer to buy only 1 or 2 kilos of bread, flour.